Before I start this video, I would like to say thank you ever so much for supporting me and following me on my channel. Now, without further ado, please enjoy this book.
Sparkle reads Poppy's Babies by Jill Barklem. For many generations, families of mice have made their homes in the roots and trunks of the trees of Branbury Hedge. If you are ever lucky enough to be nearby, you may see a wisp of smoke from a small chimney, or even a steep flight of stairs deep within the trunk of a tree.
The mice of Branbury Hedge led busy lives. They make all their own food, and during the fine weather they collect herbs, fruits, and nuts from the hedge and surrounding fields. They then prepare delicious jams, pickles, and preservatives that are kept safely in the store stump where Mr. Apple is the warden.
Mr. Apple's wife, Mrs. Apple, is the very best of cooks, and their home, Crab Apple Cottage, is always filled with the aroma of cakes and freshly baked bread. Although the mice work hard, they always have time for fun.
They welcome the opportunity to meet and celebrate, and their favourite place for a party is the Old Oak Palace. This is where Lord and Lady Woodmouse live, with their young daughter, Primrose.
Primrose's best friend is Wilfred Toeflux, who lives in the hornbeam tree at the end of the hedge. Wilfred and his brother, Tweezle, loves to play tricks on their sister, Catkin and Clover.
These are just a few of the mice that live in the hedge. Meet some of their friends and relatives in Poppy's Babies. It was the beginning of summer. Outside the trees were in leaf, and the sunshine sparkled on the stream. The windmill turned in the cool shadows of the riverbank, and inside the mill, Dusty Dogwood was busy grinding the corn for the mice of Branbury Hedge.
Poppy was upstairs trying to persuade her new babies to go to sleep, but every time they closed their eyes, the clatter of the mill shook the floorboards and woke them up again. She opened the door to the stairs, and a cloud of flour dust blew into her face. "Dusty, please finish soon. It's time for the baby's nap." "I'll do my best," he called back. The babies were still awake when two visitors peeped around the door. Do you know that there are 92 stairs up to your kitchen?" gasped Primrose.
"However do you manage with the babies?" asked Lady Woodmouse, giving Poppy a kiss.
"It's very difficult," Poppy replied. She looked as though she was about to cry. "Ah, how sweet they are," said Lady Woodmouse. "This one looks like Dusty." That's Rose. Here is Buttercup, and the little one is Pipkin." "Oh, I can't wait for their naming day," said Primrose. "When is it?" "Just 2 days away," said Lady Woodmouse. At last the mill wheels stopped turning and the babies slept. The visitors tiptoed out, and Poppy sat down to rest. She was exhausted. Dusty bagged up the flour and went over to the store stump. He found Mr. Apple sitting at his workshop door, putting the finishing touches to a wooden mouse on wheels. Wilfred, who was meant to be helping, was finding it much more amusing to play in the wood shavings. "Hello, Dusty," said Mr. Apple. "How are those babies of yours?" "Noisy," laughed Dusty, "but great fun. Poppy is not so happy, though. The mill is a very inconvenient place to live. It's noisy, Dusty, and damp, and has far too many stairs. Come and live at our house, offered Wilfred. My mother loves babies. Thank you, Wilfred, but I fancy your mother has enough on her hands with the four of you. I wonder what we can do to help Poppy, said Mr. Apple sympathetically. Dusty returned later in the day to collect some wood for a repair to the mill. Come with me, said Mr. Apple. Dusty and Wilfred followed him to a little cottage in a hawthorn tree next to the store stump. I've never noticed this house before, said Dusty. It's been empty for years. I use it to keep my timber dry, said Mr. Apple. While Dusty chose a suitable plank, Wilfred peered at an old cooking range. Does this still work? He asked. I expect so, said Mr. Apple. It used to be very cosy when my aunt lived here. Suddenly he raised a paw. Dusty, Wilfred has given me an idea. Suppose we clean the cottage and paint it. Would it suit you and Poppy? Dusty thought for a moment, and then he said excitedly, You know, I think it might. Poppy would love this, Dusty said, looking at a small sunny room. It's just the right size for a nursery. Well, let's get everything ready for naming day, said Mr. Apple. Do you think you can keep it a secret? He looked pointedly at Wilfred. I won't say anything, said Wilfred. Promise. Mr. Apple and Wilfred went off to Crab Apple Cottage to tell Mrs. Apple about the plan, and Dusty hurried home to help give the babies their bath. Look, cried Poppy. Buttercup's learnt to crawl. Dusty lifted her up and gave her a hug. I do wish we lived somewhere else, said Poppy.
I have to watch them every minute of every day.
Miss Apple had alerted all the mice along the hedge, and early next morning they began to arrive at Merry Blossom Cottage with buckets and brooms. The windows were opened wide, and the floor swept, sanded, and scrubbed. Miss Apple wiped down the dresser shelves and cleaned out the cupboards, and Miss Toadflux polished the bath. Dusty lit a pile of twigs under the grate to check that the chimney wasn't blocked. Now for the whitewash, said Mr. Apple. Do you want to mix it, Wilfred? As soon as the walls are dry, we can start to fetch the furniture from the mill, said Dusty. But how can we do that without Poppy seeing? Ah, Mrs. Apple thought of a plan, said Mr. Apple. The next day, Lady Woodmouse and Poppy sat under the hedge, sewing. Bees buzzed in and out of the flowers in the early morning sunshine, and the scent of hawthorn blossom filled the air. There, that quilt's finished, said Lady Woodmouse, putting the last stitch into a yellow flower. I've still got Pippin's grow to make, sighed Poppy. How ever am I going to finish in time? We've got a good idea, said the Lady Woodmouse. Why don't you all come and stay at the palace with us tonight? We can work on the grows together, and Primrose can help you dress the babies for naming day tomorrow morning. That would help Dusty too, said Poppy. He seems to be very busy at the moment. By late that afternoon, the cottage was almost ready. Wilfred had put the last coat of whitewash on the nursery walls, and Dusty measured up for the furniture. There, everything fits, he said with satisfaction. Let's go back to the mill for tea. Goodness, whatever have you two been doing? Asked Poppy, staring at Wilfred's fur. Painting, said Wilfred proudly. I mean, something for the babies, said Dusty quickly. You are a kind mouse, Wilfred, said Poppy. Up and down Brambury Hedge the mice were all busy. In the palace kitchen, Mrs. Krustybird was making a special cake, and her daughter, Cicely, made rose petal butter and creamy junket. Over at May Blossom Cottage, Mrs. Toadflux had laid the table and was now hanging curtains, whilst up in the nursery Lady Woodmouse unpacked the 3 little quilts. We're ready to fetch Poppy now, she said. Right, said Dusty. As soon as you're at the palace, we'll start to move in the furniture. Down at the mill, Poppy was busy packing. There seems to be so much to take, she said, folding up 3 little nightgowns. Perhaps I should stay here after all. Oh, no, said Lady Woodmouse hastily. Primrose will be so disappointed if you didn't come. Eventually they managed to get the nappies, bottles, toys, prams, and babies down the stairs, all 92 of them, and were ready to set off to the palace. The babies loved the journey. Rose gargled when she saw the stream. Pippin threw his rattle in the water, and they reached the field. Buttercup tried to get out of the pram. At the door of Old Oak Palace, Dusty kissed his family good night. Don't wait up for me, he said. I've 1 or 2 things to sort out before tomorrow. The babies were bathed and put into their nightgowns. They were so excited by their new surroundings that they didn't want to settle, but at last they fell asleep in the quiet of the hedgerow evening. Lady Woodmouse lit the lamp, then she and Poppy sat and stitched the last of the lace onto the babies' gowns. How peaceful it is here, said Poppy. As she spoke, a curious squeaking, bumping noise came through the open window. Whatever is that? Poppy asked, startled. Lady Woodmouse got up quickly and drew the curtains. Just Lord Woodmouse tidying up, she said. We'll better go to bed. We'll need to get up before first light tomorrow. Early next morning, all the mice gathered beneath the hawthorns of the naming ceremony. As dawn broke, Poppy handed old Vole the first baby. Primrose held up a cup of dew, freshly gathered from the flowers, for old Vole to sprinkle on the baby's head. The buds on the branches blossom and flower, the blackbirds sing in the leafy bowler, and over the hill comes the rising sun to shine on the fields and on you, little one. We name you Rose, said old Vole gently. Just as old Vole mentioned the last baby, Pippin, the mice heard the patter of raindrops on the leaves. Oh dear, we'll all get wet, cried Poppy. No, come this way, said Lady Woodmouse. Bring the babies. Poppy and Dusty ran towards the store stump, and Dusty stood aside to let Poppy take shelter in the open door of the cottage. Poppy found herself in the kitchen. Bright china that looked rather familiar was arranged on the dresser shelves, and garlands of flowers hung from newly washed beams. What a dear little house, said Poppy. Let's look around, said Dusty. Leaving Primrose in charge of the babies, Poppy and Dusty climbed the stairs. It's so cosy,
she said as they reached the landing. "I wonder who lives here." Dusty led her into a small room that was warm and bright. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, and beneath them stood three little cots, each, each with its own embroidery quilt. One was pink, one was yellow, and one was blue. "But, Dusty," she cried. "Yes," said Dusty. "With love from all your friends in Brambury Hedge, welcome home." Poppy threw her paws around Dusty. "This is the nicest surprise I've ever had," she said. Then ran and then she ran down the stairs to thank each mouse in return. "It's time to cut the cake," said Wilfred. Everyone was given a large slice, and Basil served a summer punch with flowers floating on top, and violet salads, rose petal sandwiches, primrose porridge, and meadow sweet tea. The babies crawled around underfoot, and Poppy was glad of Mr. Apple's gate on the stairs. Then they were given some cake and got very sticky. Soon Rose began to cry, followed by Buttercup, and Pippin rolled under the table. "Poor babies, you're tired," said Poppy. I'm going to put you into your cots." The baby mice snuggled down under their new quilts, and by the time Poppy bent to kiss them, they were fast asleep. She tiptoed back downstairs to join the guests in the kitchen. Mr. Apple proposed a toast. "To the babies," he whispered, "and their new home. To Rose, Buttercup, and Pippin," added Mrs. Apple. "Bless their little whiskers."